Welcome, everyone. As I know, many people are coming in right now. Today, we have a topic that I know is of great interest to many people, and that is nonprofit board service, um, essentials, and insights. And we're very happy to have speaker Hillary Joel, who's MBA 89. So many of you may know her already. She's going to introduce herself, her background, and take it away. So, welcome, Hillary, and thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Deborah. And I was just thrilled to see the level of interest in this topic. Before I get going into substance and introduce myself a little bit more, I would just like to know who's in the room. So, in the spirit of just understanding at what level of experience you have, if folks could just drop in the chat, call it low, medium, high, just a word. If you have little or almost no experience in nonprofits, maybe just served on your kid's school board or something. If you've served on a couple, that's medium of different kinds. And if you've held like officer roles or a lot more experience, say hi. And because I just want to see what the mix is. Okay, as I expected, it's all over the map. Um, great, great. So that means that some of what I'm saying today may not be addressing you specifically, and I'm going to try and cover a lot of ground. It may feel a little fast for those with the least experience, but I want to have something to offer those with a lot of experience. I hope you all leave with something specific you're excited to explore, exercise, experiment with in your own life or on your own boards. Okay. Yeah, as you can see, all over the map. Okay. Thanks for that. Let me just spend a minute on an intro and why I'm the person here sitting talking about this topic. My own first career was in management consulting before and after HBS, where I also actually stayed on as a research fellow and wrote cases for a year after I finished my MBA in 89, and settled in DC, where after 9/11, 2001, a small group of HBS alumni from very different ages, we got together in DC and said, what can we do? We want to give back to our community. We're done. No one needs a pint of blood from us anymore. And we founded a nonprofit, eventually called Compass and then called Compass Pro Bono. And that was my big step into the shallow then deep end of nonprofits, and learned a ton on the job, learned many lessons the hard way. That's actually where I learned about this thing called leadership coaching and got my training at Georgetown. And then my worlds converged. I was so thrilled to bring my analytical and business background together with leadership coaching and what I was learning about the social sector and the heroes that run so many mission-driven organizations. So it ended up being a big career change for me. But I know for most of you, this is something you do adjacent to your career and professional life. And there's so much you can bring to this space, as I know many of you already know. So I've worn many hats on different boards from the inside and on the outside, facilitating and consulting. And currently I'm on 3 boards and have moved around even to committees where I don't have strength in order to learn and be helpful and bring a fresh perspective. So that's me. And again, I hope wherever you are in your journey, you find ways to keep it interesting and fulfilling and keep bringing your talent and time. So I don't want to sound like a missionary, but there's so much opportunity. Okay. By the way, I'm going to try and save at least 20 minutes for Q&A, but burning questions or clarification questions, I will try and address as we go. I'm not great at tracking the chat while I'm talking to you. So Alexi, who's facilitating in the background, may help, or if you really need clarification, I guess unmute if you can, and I'll address something as we go. I don't want this to just be a one-way lecture, but most of the Q&A will be at the back end. So the core responsibilities of a nonprofit board are very similar to a for-profit board. And these are the 4 biggies. And I just want to say a little bit about each one. And by the way, that's not a synchronized swimming team. That's a water polo team. I chose that picture because board members play different roles based on their strengths. And they have to be aligned, and the board chair matters a lot. They set the tone, but the roles are are different across board members, and that the value of those diverse functional expertise, life experience, sector representation are really important. But looking at the four big responsibilities, strategic leadership is actually a ton of fun if you're an MBA type. It's a place where you get to bring your kind of analytical lens together with creative problem solving. And some of my favorite moments on boards have been serving on a strategic growth task force, for example. And this was at Compass Pro Bono, figuring out what should our path to growth look like? What are the gates where we check, are we ready for the next stage? What are the markers, the metrics, not just financial, really interesting work. And those trajectory points or pivot points and larger high stakes decisions are the ones where the board would get more involved, not in the month to month execution of strategy. Also, every few years, sometimes you got to revisit, or if the landscape and economy change a lot, or the technology, whatever, you may be revisiting the actual mission and strategy of the organization. Mission doesn't change very much, but strategy and program at a high level can change. So at this 10,000 foot view, the strategic leadership, and you are a co-pilot, collectively thought partner with staff leadership, whether they're called a CEO or an executive director. Fiduciary oversight is really important. A board of directors does have this fiduciary responsibility. And hopefully your board, like a corporate board, has directors and D&O insurance, directors and officers insurance, that gives you some personal protection of your own financial assets as separate from the organization. But this is more than just looking at the books every quarter. This is thinking broadly about dimensions of risk that could be a major financial hit: reputational risk, regulatory compliance risk, IRS reporting. There could be conflicts of interest. You often sign a conflict of interest agreement when you join a board. And then the day-to-day cash flow. Are the financial management practices and record keeping of the organization sufficient to ensure financial health and sustainability? And CEO performance. And by the way, fiduciary oversight sits primarily with the treasurer, who's usually the chair of the finance committee, which is one of the most important standing committees on even a small nonprofit. CEO performance, that's the whole life cycle, from recruiting, hiring, replacing, to evaluating, arranging compensation, and then very, very importantly, supporting that lonely at the top role with advice and support, maybe professional development. Maybe sometimes a board member will do a deep dive. Let's say they have a background in something like real estate contracts or marketing, and the CEO is planning for a heavy lift in that area. I do want to say there's a lot of boards that, and I'm confessing here, where we don't do a good enough job. We don't give the CEO a performance evaluation every year because we're spread so thinly. Remember, a nonprofit board is volunteer. I'll say more about that later. But they need and deserve feedback on what's working really well. And it's that those feedback conversations are a time to check that the board and staff leadership are aligned. Like, what does success look like? What does exceeding goals look like? So super important. And one of my most gratifying roles in this area was serving on the leadership transition committee. We didn't call it just leadership search, because our task force stayed together to make sure the new CEO onboarded well. It wasn't find the person and let them sink or swim. But the rigor and the engagement from a handful of board members on that was really important to the organization, especially when we were moving from a founding CEO. And the last area is the care and feeding of that governance function itself, of the board. It doesn't take care of itself. So you need to make sure that new board members are sufficiently educated and onboarded, and that all board members are reminded of why they joined and stay motivated and bring their ideas appropriately, proactively, via committee level work, full board meetings and debates. and that the accountability is there. You know, someone might join and then life changes for them and they don't have the bandwidth to keep being a contributing member. So there's several dimensions to the governance. And what does a nonprofit board generally not do? And there's sometimes a temptation to step into this lane, guilty as charged. I can be a detail-oriented person, but we're operating at the 10,000 and 5,000 foot view usually. Sometimes a task force or committee is invited to get more specific, but it's not our job to propose a redesign of operations and processes just because we think we know how to make things more efficient or we're an expert in Salesforce or a tool. It's not our job beyond the CEO to get involved in personnel decisions, job descriptions, feedback, org chart. The CEO will often consult the board or executive committee or some group for input, but it's their call. They're in charge of the rest of the staff. And we're also not generally involved in the nitty gritty of marketing, communications, fundraising, which is called development, unless invited to like, hey, we're reviewing the messaging. Is this consistent? Are these messages you as an ambassador feel comfortable delivering? Will the external stakeholders, will this land well? And again, sporadically, we might be involved in innovation or deciding about the piloting of a new program, but not the day-to-day content design or production and programming of whatever the product services the nonprofit offers. Okay. This slide, wait, let me just go back a sec. Okay. I'm going to pause in a minute in case there's burning questions or clarification questions. I wanted to just give you a snapshot of how corporate and nonprofit boards differ. And all of this, I'm generalizing to make points, but these are generalizations and they can vary. So I don't want you to leave thinking that nonprofit boards are less analytical or more touchy-feely or don't use some of the same practices or aim to use some of the same practices that corporate boards use. But there's some major difference on what they're setting out to do. It's not shareholder value and profit growth. I'm going to talk about only two of the items on this slide where the yellow arrows are. You're going to get this deck, by the way, to keep in a PDF form. And I hope the others are somewhat self-explanatory, but you will have time to bring questions later. The first one I want to talk about is metrics and performance measurement, or in nonprofits, it's often called impact measurement. My talk, I guess, is referencing mostly social service organizations, whether it's international development, local youth programs, education, international environmental or health, housing types organizations. But nonprofits include all the performing arts and many other kinds of organizations as well. And I'll use Compass Pro Bono as a case study real quick here. Our capacity and focus on performance measurement has evolved a lot over time. And honestly, you know, when you start out around someone's kitchen table, it's just like a for-profit startup, all hands on deck, you're a working board. There's no paid staff, sometimes for years. And you're trying something because you're passionate about making a difference. And you try that thing and you think you know what success looks like, and then you get whatever form of feedback is most accessible. In our case, it was pro bono consulting projects, team-based pro bono consulting projects for local nonprofits. And then in the early days, we evolved. Again, this is like a maturation curve. And we're getting some more project-specific data. We could survey the volunteers, the professionals who were serving on these projects and the nonprofit clients around satisfaction. Would you recommend us? Will you come back? It was the unit was a project, and there wasn't much integration or over time we weren't tracking things. Then we matured more and we got better at longitudinal surveys and could actually see, did volunteers come back and volunteer to do another project in another year? Did clients refer us or ask for a different kind of pro bono project? We start looking at trend and trajectory data and the demographics of what organizations. We finally like have enough volume to say, hey, we want to be intentional about what nonprofits we're serving, what their leadership looks like, the sizes and the sectors, and the diversity of the volunteers we're working with. So this is just a continuation of the curve, and sometimes there's more of a blip. We reached a point where actually we redefined our impact from not just doing pro bono consulting projects, but really forging ties between business professionals and nonprofit leaders, because our volunteers started being invited to join the nonprofit boards. And that was an amazing outcome and a lasting, enduring outcome. Our business professionals went from being a volunteer to leading a project or recruiting their organization, their corporation or consulting firm to partner with us. So we started measuring new things, and we needed to also start measuring revenue diversification to have financial resilience. So we looked at different ways, even though the consulting itself is pro bono, how do we diversify where our funds are coming from? So you get the idea, and then new tools become available. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, that make it easy to be more efficient, and then to even slice and dice data in new ways. The big takeaway here is the dimensions of impact measurement are more complicated than a for-profit organization. And they take thought, persistence, and patience. You don't want to collect data that's just outputs, that's not outcomes, but maybe all you can do is start with outputs as a proxy for your social impact. So it's complex stuff, and definitely you use some of those MBA skills you have, or executive ed skills. I'm going to pause if there are questions. Oh, yes, fundraising. I'm sorry. I should have highlighted that. When the goal where I talked about fiduciary responsibility, the role of helping with fundraising, not just overseeing financial management, is very, very important. And I'm going to dedicate a slide to that. I saw that in the chat. Anything else? Anyone want to come off mute with a question? Okay. I'm gonna go. I said the other dimension I wanted to talk about was revenue, was funding sources. And it's a real game, a challenge. It's not just revenue for products and services sold. And I know those who said high experience in the sector know this, but the revenue streams come in many shapes and sizes with different restrictions on them, different degrees of predictability, and different requirements for cultivating them and sustaining them. So earned income is the term when a nonprofit actually has a service that it sells. An example of that is DC Central Kitchen. Probably heard of World Central Kitchen, but Jose Andres started with DC Central Kitchen, a fantastic organization. And their culinary training program, they actually have large contracts, food services contracts, to sell meals to DC public schools. That's earned income. There's all kinds of, you can have programs where one subsidizes another. I'm on the board of Washington Improv Theater. Our class programs, we can charge more than the cost to us to keep our seat price low for the tickets for the improv performances. So there's creative things going on internally. And nonprofits have to check, and the boards do, that one fundraising effort isn't cannibalizing another. So if you do a year-end appeal, and then I'm on a youth services, first gen to college organization for college access and success. Well, if we do a graduation event a few months after the end of year appeal, how do we balance that we maximize the giving? You don't want someone to say, I already gave, and they gave $200 when actually you're looking for $5,000 donations to sponsor a few students or whatever. So there's a lot of strategic possibility, I'll say, and funding diversification is more important than ever for nonprofits, because we're on shakier ground than we've been. I say we, for the boards I'm on, than we've been in a long time. This sort of downstream or upstream, the supply chain is fragile. When federal grants get cut, State and local programs may lose funding. So then the state and local funding is disrupted, or what you counted on, and you need new sources. And the philanthropic community, that landscape is going through its own change. In the last decade, there's been some wonderful shift in a positive direction where private foundations, for example, are being less demanding in terms of their grant application process, and not asking nonprofits to jump through hoops and redesign the way they report on impact and financials just to satisfy one nonprofit. There's more trust-based grant giving going on, but at the same time, philanthropy is wondering about the stability of their assets and what leaks or holes they're going to need to plug in their existing nonprofits, let alone funding new initiatives. And then there's the balance between government sources of funding and private sector and corporation. Depending on the type of nonprofit, one of those legs of the stool, government, corporate, philanthropy, individual giving, may be completely inaccessible or tiny compared to the other, but you need at least a 3-legged stool, if not a 4-legged stool. I won't elaborate on this, but I wanted to show the diversity in kind. Donated services can be really important. Oh, it looks like someone's still trying to get in a meeting. Okay. Okay, fundraising, yeah. I've been on boards and coached and interacted with boards where board members are like, oh, I hate asking for money. Don't ask me to ask my friends for money. We're not that kind of board. We're not the Met. We're not MoMA. My Rolodex doesn't have people who are going to donate $50,000. To this, I'll say every board has to have a fundraising mentality. And in fact, nonprofit leaders will tell their staff, fundraising is all of our jobs, whether you're in program work or data analytics or frontline work, you can contribute to some of the development revenue streams. The concept give or get is often a policy in many boards. It means you commit to say, I will give or get $2,500 or $5,000. If I don't give it personally, I'll get it by attracting other donors to the organization or getting an employer match or playing a role in some sort of connection that leads to a new grant. So that's what give or get is. And some organizations don't have a hard, fast minimum number because that gets in the way of being an inclusive board. So there's ways to handle this, but in addition, even if you're not the person with the Rolodex, who knows, 25 people who will all write $5,000 or $20,000 checks, you can help with the stewardship of boards. Here's a fun activity I've done at board meetings. Everyone, at an in-person board meeting, we're all given 5 or 10 names to just call and kind of speed dial and thank a donor. We take 10 minutes out of our meeting, say, I'm a board member. They're like, wow, a board member's calling to thank me. You leave a voicemail and you say, I love this organization. I've been part of it for so long, and here's why. 1-minute message. So you can play a role in the thanking. You can accompany the executive director or CEO on a pitch, a grant pitch, or go to site visits and bring your friends to site visits to see the nonprofit programming in action. So there are a lot of things you can do. Host a informal or co-host an informal group and do a friend-raising event rather than fundraising. So I'm going to pause again. Questions to elaborate or illuminate, because some of you have this great experience. Please come. Is there a good benchmark? I can't generalize. There are nonprofits with budgets under $1 million, and then there's like the Washington Ballet and the Kennedy Center. The give gets, honestly, I'm on boards that go from having none to having a national organization having a $10,000 minimum give, regardless of get. No, is it 10 or 15? It might be 15 now. I'm on another one where the required give is only 500 because it's a small organization. So I know it's not satisfying for me to say it depends, but if I knew more about an organization and the kind of people it needs on its board, that would also inform it. Is it a board where you want to attract school teachers because you're in education? Well, we know what school teachers make. So it can really vary a lot. Compass gets its funding from major donors, corporate partners, the big consulting firms and law firms. If we can say, hey, we'll put your rising leaders on a volunteer project, great leadership development experience, and will you donate to us? And it makes you a good community member. You can bragging rights about your role in the community, and bragging about the service you offer your employees. And we don't get federal government. So it's individual giving, large grants, different kinds of grants, and corporate partners. And doing a capital campaign now because we want to grow to more cities. We just entered New York City, by the way, compassprobono.org. We're not on the West Coast yet. Very perfect
So
organization
I
for it.
just want to mention with
Yeah.
some of them, and you did bring this up, that some boards, especially if they want inclusion from communities representing neighborhoods, like a performing arts group, etc., then the financial give is not as much as the influence, because they can influence their community, they can go out and get participation for whatever it is that you're doing, such as performing arts. Um, and I found when they do that, those boards tend to be more interesting because it's people that are actually living it or in the areas that you're trying to serve that get um, really valuable strategic input and just every day, no, this is how it is.
Right. Deborah, thank you for saying that. And that's one reason that one of the boards I'm on, College Tracks, we don't have a minimum give, but we say give at a level that's meaningful, substantial and meaningful to you. So we would hope, even if someone's just giving $25 because you're still paying a ton of student loans and they're, 29 years old, we're one of their top recipients. Maybe they loyal to a faith community or an alma mater or whatever. And we didn't want two classes of board citizens. So we didn't want to say, oh, we have alumni of our program on the board. And it's amazing to have them because the knowledge they bring, and it's not to check a box on diversity and inclusion. They tell us this is how you help kids who are trying to get through college who have no role models in their life. And also they're fantastic spokespeople for the organization. I love hearing them talk about the value of our work. So having that diversity and a representation of the community you're serving is really important. And that can be why you don't have a firm give and get. I'm going to talk through kind of concisely some other things that come up. And I want to make sure I have time for even the questions of the most experienced board members here. So you leave with something. I've been talking in generalizations. As I said, startup boards are a different beast. So, it's not the Wild West, but you're not focused on best practices and some of these protocols and checks and balances. You don't even have enough people at the table to have committees. That's one of the growth pains. So, so much of work gets done on a more established board at the committee level. And if committees aren't active, the board's really leaving its value on the table. But if your startup board has 6 people, you don't have enough people to have a program committee and a marketing committee and a finance committee. Another concept, I guess this can happen in the entrepreneurial world, but nonprofit world, sometimes the founder of a nonprofit, in the minds of many, they are the face and name, they're the hero of the organization. And the organization can feel like, yikes, how are we going to survive without them? Or all our donors are going to leave because they love this person. And the founder themselves has their identity so tied to the organization, they have a lot of trouble stepping away. And that's a place for executive coaching and the board being involved in leadership transition to take care of the process and not just the external communications and the recruitment and hiring screening, but a very intentional process, especially if you're moving on from a founder. Fiscal sponsor, just to tell you what that term is, some nonprofits are not technically in the eyes of the IRS, which calls it a 501c3 organization, can't take tax deductible donations. And if you're a nonprofit in mission and spirit and organization, but haven't attained your own 501c3 status, you can find a nonprofit that will be your fiscal sponsor, hopefully for a very modest fee, so people can make donations to them and they pass the money to you and it gets to be tax deductible. Now I've been involved in a situation where we didn't have sufficient oversight for a while, and we got to some scary terrain. We had to do some forensics to track down where was the money they were holding for us. Hopefully that never happens to you. Community representation is what Deborah was talking about. And you have to think about the perspectives of representation. Who are you trying to serve? Who knows the community best or is adjacent to the people you're serving because of their professional lane? Mission moments. This is one of my favorite times to be a board member. And ideally, every board meeting, whether they're quarterly or more often, has the CEO has arranged a mission moment together with the board chair. And you are being reminded very explicitly about why you love the organization and its impact. Whether it's an anecdote about a particular life changed or what evolved from a volunteer effort grew into something else with this enduring value and this organization changed. Maybe you saved an organization $50,000 because of what your pro bono team did for them. Those mission moments are really important. And in addition to them, it's important to get out there and see the organization in action once or twice a year, whatever the events are, whether it's site visits or hands-on opportunity to hear what's happening on the ground, so you don't get your passion and your engagement doesn't get stale. Financial reporting for nonprofits is different. There's a set of regulations, and I'll just highlight, I've never worn the treasurer hat, but two things that are important to understand is restricted funding. If like someone gives $50,000 and it's only for this school program or this building or this whatever, it has to be tracked separately and spent that way, and reflected in the books. Multi-year grants create another kind of layer of responsibility and complication, whether you're doing cash-based or accrual reporting, can affect when you recognize the grant and how you explain to your donors, your funders, and your annual report how that revenue stream is landing in the books. If you have to recognize a large multi-year grant all at once, it could make the next year look like it's a deficit year, but it's actually not because you got the second year of the grant there. If you're trying to learn about a nonprofit, two places other than the website and any media articles you can find are their 990 forms. That's their publicly available tax form. And you can access that by going to candid.org. That used to be called GuideStar, but Candid is the merger of two organizations. And it's a great place to go look under the hood and see the revenue streams, the expense, multi-year, and you can even see what the highest paid person made. You could see who's on the board. You can learn a lot about a nonprofit from their GuideStar page and ratings, and the 990 and other tax forms available there. Okay. Oops, I didn't mean to go there yet. Okay, advisory boards. There are other kinds of boards that don't have the fiduciary responsibility of a board of directors. And that can be an on-ramp to serving on a board. It can be kind of an off-ramp. Sometimes after serving out your term limits or a lot of years, you might move to an advisory board, which would be way less formally structured, less of a meeting requirement. I at one point when I hit term limits after 10 years on the Compass board, we formed an advisory board, and we weren't just putting our board members out to pasture, but it was a way to stay connected and to be able to say that I'm still supporting this organization. It's still one of my favorites. I rejoined the board and I'm on it now, the main board. But an advisory board, I kind of wondered, it's like, wait, am I missing meetings? What's going on? It turned out that for Compass at this point, 10 years ago, whatever it was, our CEO was just using it as like a bunch of thought partners. So they'd call the person who knows about HR issues when they had this issue. They'd call someone else about this issue. They'd call someone else about this. And that was it. And sometimes a young professionals board is to prepare the next generation. I've heard them called junior boards. I think that might be a little derogatory because they're not kids. But there's other forms out there. And so, a lot of committees of nonprofit boards, you can be on a committee without being on the main board. And that could be a way to start your courtship and get to know an organization, to serve on the development committee or some other committee. And then the degree of decentralization and boundaries across organizations can vary. You have organizations like Girls on the Run or Boys and Girls Clubs or City Year have a chapter model. They may or may not be very centralized and have just one fiduciary board of directors. They may be decentralized and have multiple boards. Compass, as an example, we have one true board of directors, but each city has an advisory board with its own member agreements, but not this, and fundraising goals and expectations, but not the fiduciary responsibility of the national board. Okay, and term limits are often one common example is to serve a term is often 3 years. This is a rule of thumb. It's not always the case. And usually often you can't renew more than 2 terms, and then you have to at least step away for a year before you come back. Now I'm on a board that doesn't have term limits, and some people have been on a really long time, and it's sort of working for us right now. Maybe we need term limits now. So that's just a concept. And to remind you, this is volunteer service. For those who are at the new level, level of being exposed, I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but these are considerations of what kind of board you might want to be on. So think about the skills you're eager to bring. Think about your temperament. Think about your time availability and flexibility. And I mean, most importantly, think about mission. So be excited about the mission of the organization first, but then consider these other factors that affect how mature, how formal it'll be, how stable the policies and protocols will be, how clear role clarity will be for the board. But make sure you just love what they often call theory of change. Like, this organization exists to achieve this outcome, and this is how we do it from this starting point. So you want to understand so that you're not joining a party that's all about scope creep, a board that's trying to help too many people in too many ways. Questions here?
I wanted to just address the scope creep that you mentioned, and relates to sources of revenue, because I have found with some boards, if they were getting, let's say, government funding, or state or federal, as well as others, where they could have leaders who's so good at finding opportunities that suddenly the organizations, it's not even clear what they do, because they've got so many different aspects. And then that's a hard thing to turn around once it's there, because they're wedded to the income sources. So I've often found with some of these to introduce an idea of planning, which is look at your competitors, and they can't grasp what a competitor is because they're in a nonprofit. And, if they start having scope creep, so to speak, it's important to understand, where are the dollars, where are some organizations similar to yours or sound similar to yours, where's that, who are they, and when does it make sense for you to join forces on certain areas. So but that's just part of the evolution of certain kinds of
Yeah,
organizations.
it's a big topic, and you don't want the tail to wag the dog because you found a philanthropist who will give you $1 million if you build a program in their backyard or their county or whatever. It's hard to turn around. You don't want to turn off the faucet on money that's coming. And it's a really important place where board discipline can help staff leadership figure out what are the criteria, what are the boundaries, and then also sometimes say, okay, don't let programs go on forever because of inertia. Where do we pull the plug? Because we are not getting a bang for the buck. But let's say we operate in, 8 places in the city, and in 2, we're so under under enrolled, we're wasting access, or it's more expensive, so much more expensive to do what we do over here. And yes, it's so tempting to want to add wraparound services to the people you help. It started education, now it's healthcare, now it's wellness, now it's housing. And some organizations will say they're holistic, but it should be very intentional and not driven by a donor's ideas. I do see in the chat, and we'll get to Q&A real soon, someone would like to hear one or two other very experienced board members talk about their board journey, where it started, like briefly, and where it evolved. And I love that question. So let me get to my last slides. These are some of my top lessons, learned the hard way in many cases. I just encourage you, I use this back photo, not because board service is a walk in the park. It can bring headaches and challenges because you care, but because it's full of beautiful moments and surprises around the corner. No board can can be A+ in all the aspects of best practices. And so you got to be patience, persistence, and be a catalyst for directional improvements in how a board is run and how it's valuable to the organization. It's super rewarding, and you meet people that you don't meet within the lane of your profession or life otherwise, multi-generational and just bringing fascinating expertise. The relationship between a chair and a CEO is so important. It's the crown jewels, or it can sabotage, hopefully temporarily, a board's functioning. So it's really important they're aligned and they communicate well with a lot of trust, and that's reflected in how board meetings and committees work. I can't underestimate how important it is to get a good start with a new board member, whether they have experience or not. Like, these are the expectations here. Everybody's on a committee. We don't blow off our committee responsibilities between board meetings. We like each other. We know when to ask questions. We know when to, just be curious and listen and poke, but don't try to have all the answers, and don't pretend you have all the answers. On the best boards, committee work is where a lot happens. You can't have a board of 15 or 25 people have a working session every quarter and get a lot done for the organization. So committees often do the groundwork, whether it's the annual budgeting at the finance committee, whether it's the development plan for next year's fundraising, and then they review at the board meeting, the full board meeting, and they'll recommend who are we extending an offer to join the board. So that committee work offline is really important. And I also learned that some board members, I realized I made presumptions because they weren't as involved in the board meetings. I thought they weren't adding value. I didn't know what they were doing behind the scenes to help the CEO directly with a real estate contract, with certain connections, with whatever it might be. So some of the work happens out of sight, and it's okay. You don't know everything going on, and you have to accept that. Every good board meeting has some time allotted. I'm a big fan of really time allotted board agendas for a generative discussion. Maybe you're probing about something you might pilot. Maybe it's just to not make decisions, but collect board perspectives on a growth trajectory point, or some other high stakes issue, just to hear what folks are thinking about. Or it really is a decision point and we're going to need a vote, and that should be clear up front on the agenda. There's always important stuff to pre-read before a board meeting. I've seen boards, sometimes we tend to want to protect the organization, protect the staff. So we can go too far with risk aversion, and we can go too far the other way with like, oh, I don't want to say no to good ideas. So that's a big part of the board's discipline and involvement, is keeping that focus and taking smart risks. How are we on time? All right, I think I'm not going to go through all of these. Think they're self-explanatory. I wanted to open up to questions, and oh, the pickleball court, interesting one there. If anyone has a question about any bullet on this slide, I will talk to it. And otherwise, I'd love to hear someone with a lot of experience share what, just as Deborah has, kind of their top takeaways or perspective on their board journey. What they wish they knew when they started, or who wants to come off mute? I don't know, I can't see everyone at once, so maybe start talking if,
I'm Deborah DeVeg, and I've served on more than 35 boards of directors, for profit and not for profit, including chairing them and serving on a lot of the executive committees. One of the things that I think you need to think about when you are choosing a board or investigating all of this is the importance of culture and the chemistry that you'll have with the board of directors for which you're going to be serving. Just as you think about a company for which you're going to be working, what is that culture? Is it a spirit? Is there a spirit of innovation? Is there a spirit of collegiality? Is it a very top-down kind of situation? And so it's really important to establish your expectations or to understand the expectations going both ways, because one organization might be absolutely perfect for you and totally wrong for somebody else. So really understand the organization and figure out what the expectations are from a mutual perspective. And as a result, you will be able to grow with the organization and help the organization grow. So I can't stress that enough. And don't be afraid to be yourself, and don't be afraid to ask questions and be curious, because the board of directors that doesn't want somebody asking questions and being curious is a board of directors you want to run away from as quickly as possible. That's what the
amen,
that's what the
amen to
value.
that.
Yeah, that's what the value an HBS gal is going to be providing for these organizations. And if they don't want to hear it, that's not a good place for you.
Right, and don't limit yourself and think, oh, the boardroom is not a place to ask questions. I'm a big fan of having a board buddy, so find someone, or maybe someone's assigned to you. I got a lot of questions about things I know I can't take over the meeting and ask them, but I need answers, or I can't add value. It's not a place to try and look smart. It's a place to learn together. So thank you so much for that, Deborah. How can I see a question about how can board meetings be less general updates? Oh gosh, that's the worst. When they just go through the board packet that we're supposed to have read. I'd insist on time blocking parts on the agenda and have a chunk. If it's a 2-hour board meeting, maybe there's 20, 30 minutes that are a generative topic. What is keeping the CEO up at night? Or what are we looking around the corner to? Is the next 3-year strategic plan, are we on the horizon? Can we do some early generative thinking where we're not saying, don't worry, we're not making decisions today, that we're collecting perspectives. So making sure there's something on the agenda and someone qualified to facilitate that part of the conversation in an inclusive way. And don't let the development director or the in-house accountant, whatever, CFO, read the board packet in the meeting. And hopefully people have read it. And you say, what questions do you have after reading it? That's what you do with the 10 minutes devoted to financial update. What questions do you have? Other thoughts? Again, experienced members speak up here, like Deborah did. Oh, when we built Compass, I was a co-founder and we had a volunteer chair who was our unpaid first executive director. Then we went to part-time over many years. And then I became board chair when we had a full-time director. That was many years ago. Really, we were not following best practices. We were overseeing every pro bono project and checking in on it. But that's what we needed to do at first. Speak up.
Hillary, you might want to address the issue of when there's conflict at a board. What kind of a role is it that, especially a new board member might be playing? Why don't you address that a little bit? Because, you had loads of experiences, and this is something that will come up on occasion when people have different ideas and different approaches, and it's not the same as a business meeting. So,
right. Thank you, Deborah. So theoretically, it's the board chair's job to keep the meeting constructive and on topic and useful to the executive director and to the board. I've been on meetings where a board chair doesn't step in, they're very conflict avoidant. Frankly, even if I'm not an officer, I'll say, hey, time check. And that's why I love saying, it's 8:20. We're supposed to be talking about da-da-da now. I think any board member can politely say, I just want to do a topic and time check on this, because we know we have important stuff to get to. Who should take this offline? So I think any board member can do that. And hopefully you don't join a board where there's already divisive camps, because a new board member can't undo that and turn that around. In terms of conflicts, anyone on the board, hopefully the officers and the executive committee, which is the senior folks, take the lead on this, but to say, hey, let's zoom out. It seems like we're having a disagreement about X, and that seems to be the underlying issue here is blah, 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 cost versus speed, or reputational risk versus innovation. Can someone take this offline? Can we circulate something in email? Or anyone with facilitation skills to just depersonalize it in the moment and make a call, say, hey, let's hear 5 more minutes to hear different perspectives, but what 2 people will take this offline and circulate something? I've seen that work. Deborah, do you want to add another tactic to that?
Well, I mean, I think you pretty much established it. The one thing that becomes valuable, especially for not young board members, but new board members, is to get to know individually on a one-on-one basis the different board members, so you can anticipate both how they're going to respond to stuff, or when a conflict does arise, you can say, well, Joe, when you were out on the golf course, whatever, those kinds of things. So the problem with the nonprofit boards is that often people are serving for good reasons because they're very personally invested in the organization or the cause. But on the flip side, that also means that they tend, or they can often, the view of what they're seeing is masked by their personal passions. And I think Callie kind of references it a little bit. How can people be negative and so on, with the negativity. So I think to the extent that you can get to know people and their personalities, that becomes helpful, and you can become a more valuable board member in contributing and steering the conversation and getting the mission to be achieved or realized. So I think that's kind of important. And sometimes you just have to be really careful because, as Hillary is saying, most of the major decisions happen offline. They're not going to
there
have it
shouldn't be
at a board.
surprises. There shouldn't be surprises in the pre-reading. And
Right.
frankly, a good CEO will call selected board members in advance to make sure they have allies in the room, co-champions on anything that's going to get discussed, and to anticipate, okay, I know, Hillary's going to hate this idea. I'm going to talk to her before the meeting, and say, Hillary, please, please don't be the Debbie Downer for the whole meeting. Yeah, this thing about dysfunctional boards and board members who never roll off. So you need new blood. If there is a critical mass of people who've been there forever and tend to be negative, you can only make an incremental difference by designing an agenda that says, we're not going to complain about what doesn't work. This is a conversation about solutions. But if the board chair is letting those people just go, it's time. Bring in a Compass Pro Bono board development project. So the outside expert tells you that, by the way, we're only in 5 cities. So that, you know what, you need term limits. Board development is an area of expertise, and don't take it personally. You need term limits. Maybe those people go on an advisory board, but you need some new blood at some point. You don't have the right people on the bus, just like in a company.
And I want to say that can happen even more if it's an organization that has some prestige. There's people who sit on boards because of the prestige, and that's really what it is. And, sometimes you have to ask privately, the CEO suggests they get some outside consultant to do some work so
Right.
that it depersonalizes it.
Right. They need a backup perspective, or a board assessment, and hopefully you can find something affordable. Yes, Tony Farrell has their hand up. Come on
I
up.
think the key difference, if you have experience in the for-profit world to go into the nonprofit world, is the pace at which things can change is very different. It sometimes seems radically slow. I served ultimately about 17 years on a botanical garden board, and there were 2 initiatives that people had sort of agreed on, but it wasn't happening. And I ended up there for 17 years because the name change of the institution took 7 years, and the going from being free to charging admission took 10. And it was because, well, we had like a staff of 45, but 800 volunteers and a board, and the board is all volunteers. And so you had these ever widening concentric circles of people that needed to be on board for these changes. And it took an immense amount of time, public-private partnership with government and the nonprofit. And so you need to, if there's something that's important to be done and you want to make a contribution, you have to be so persistent maybe even cross the line from being persistent to relentless to make something happen. Because in a committee, which a board is a committee, anybody can stop it at any point. Just like a gentle no stops things in their tracks. So it took years of persistent driving to make those things change. And
Yeah,
so you can learn to be patient.
yes, and persistent. And Tony, I do want to say on a well-run board, a little bit of resistance doesn't necessarily stop things in their track. I want to give up some words of hope to the dysfunctional board. Again, maybe don't stay forever, go bring your talent and passion somewhere else. But what you can do is I look for excuses to be the person to speak up. I happen to be on a committee where the head of the committee is caught up in federal furlough chaos, really affecting their lives. And I just want to be a good committee member. So I'm being more proactive than maybe I should be. I don't think I'm not stepping on toes. I think he's appreciative. But if you know someone is going to just derail the conversation, and let's say you're on the, I don't know, you're on the strategic planning committee and you're going to talk about it at the board meeting, and this person is going to bring their old complaints, call them privately before the meeting and say, hey, look, I don't want to discourage staff. I don't want to discourage board members, old or new ones. And I'm just asking you, like, I really want this to generate inspiration and ideas. So can you back me up on this? I know there's constraints we've dealt with for years, they're not going away. And try to work it before or around the meeting, or asking a member of the executive committee to have that conversation with a board member. But again, you try these things. If they don't make enough of a difference, it may be time for you to leave that board. We have 2 more minutes. Someone want to raise their hand or ask a question? And feel free to use the chat more to connect with each other or put something out there real quickly. If you're like, hey, I'm on such and such a board, we're looking for new members. And you'll have my email in the deck if you want to reach out to me.
Hillary, why don't you describe the best way for people to research and figure out how they want to which boards they want to join and why they want to join it and what their expectations are?
Yes. Even though you can go to LinkedIn or an organization called idealist.org and maybe see some postings, just like with jobs, the best way to find it is more personal. So think about what you care about. Is it youth? Is it environment? Is it local? Is it national? Is it whatever? Google around a little bit. Find the organizations in the domain or the community where you think you'd want to help. And I really encourage some form of exposure and courtship before you raise your hand to join a board. So at Compass, you can volunteer on a project, for example. We're in New York, Minneapolis, Chicago, Philly, and DC. Maybe there's an event, like get acquainted with what the organization does and how it works. And you can't attend a board meeting if you're not on the board, but maybe you can learn about the culture and get some exposure. GuideStar is a good place to go once you have the names of organizations. Foundations or donor advised funds. Yeah, there's other ways, but I'm not going to do a laundry list now. Let's see, I'm looking at new questions. Oh, help a mother out in San Francisco Bay Area. Annie Myers says they're looking for new board members. Okay. I love board buddies. Someone said that every new board member should be assigned, and you raise your hand. You don't do this, have someone reluctantly be a buddy, but have at least 2 conversations. They can even be on Zoom. Hey, dump all your stupid questions here. None of them are stupid. I want you to get up to speed, and people don't ask enough questions in board meetings. So the buddy system is really good. We also do a board orientation on Zoom where a few board members are there with the incoming sort of cohort of new board members. Any aspect, and make sure your CEO is getting some sort of meaningful feedback, including the positive, and that you're staying aligned with what they're doing. There's so much out of sight, out of mind. CEOs will send monthly little updates to the board, and they get radio silence back. They don't know if anyone's read it. So I'm the board member who hits reply all. I try to role model this kind of engagement and say, hey, Marianne, this is great. Thanks for explaining that. Glad that event went well or whatever. And over time, I've joined different committees so I don't get stale. So I stay on my toes and I learn new things. Okay. So I hope those who are relatively new to this are encouraged. And those who are already involved, stay involved. I will stay on for a few more minutes if want to honor the time. Thank you for coming to learn. You're going to get a PDF of this deck and includes my email and my email in the chat. Sure. Shoot, why isn't it not? Oh, okay.
Thank you so much, Hillary. Gave great information, and you can tell from the turnout that we had, there's a lot of people really interested. So thanks for taking the time. This was great.
Thank you for inviting me. Okay, I'll just stay on a few minutes. Great.
Hillary, I have a question for you.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Alicia or Alicia?
Yeah, Alicia. So you mentioned, I have so many questions for you, but you mentioned maybe volunteering or helping out with the organization prior to joining a board. I live in a pretty small community, and I'm curious about, I don't even know how to ask this. In some of these small communities, people who join the board are often people who either can provide a ton of money or are just like literally have never been in business at all, but are just passionate about what's going on. Like, how do you navigate? There's a lot there, I know, but like, how would you sift through these opportunities in a small community where so you don't get I know I can add a lot of value, but I don't want to get really frustrated with people who,
Right.
I don't know.
Gosh. So, well, maybe as you shop for a board, you find a friend or two who also wants to shop with you. And maybe there's someone you know who joins at the same time. And if you share an interest and they bring business skills that could be valuable. You, in asking to understand the board, maybe you can ask around. Well, if they're on their website, you can see, do they have people with business backgrounds? Do they not even have bios of their board members on the website? That I don't want to say that's definitely a red flag, but that's a yellow flag. I see that. I don't know if my bio's on all the websites. Anyway, find out if how many people have served on other nonprofit boards. I hear you. You don't want to join a board where it's just all the founders' friends and they just love helping the local, thrift shop. I don't know what it is. And it's a social thing for them. Finding out if there's committee structures and if committees meet
Oh, that's
is
a good
like
one.
an indicator of like, are they doing work?
Yeah,
I hope that helps.
that does help. Thank you.
Joel, I feel like I just saw something about ED salaries. There is a resource, and I'm forgetting the name of it. If you drop me an email, Joel, I'll send it to you. A nonprofit executive search firm that shares their summary compensation analysis for free instead of charging $500 for a big report that I could forward to you based on size of organization and that kind of thing. ED salaries can vary a lot because founders will work for almost nothing and they skew the results in one way. And the nature of the service being offered, gosh, it can sure vary a lot. Any other questions? All right. I think we're done here. And thanks for bringing your curiosity and your interest in this topic. So it's a great enduring thing to be involved in, especially in later stages in life. And you may have more time. Okay, I think we're dropping the meeting now. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Hillary.